Greetings Commander players and big welcome to a cEDH deck tech video for Soul of Windgrace with Valakut the Molten Pinnacle. But why Valakut? Why would you build a competitive commander deck around a red land that comes into play tapped? When I first started out building Valakut, I actually made it into a casual deck, and my aim was I wanted a deck that was very hard to interact with. It's very easy to destroy mass artifacts, it's very easy to destroy mass creatures, and in some cases it's easy to destroy mass enchantments, and planeswalkers are also very easy to kill. But no one really touches lands, they get to stick around more or less. I also wanted a deck that would be very active, go into the game and be quite oppressive continuously throughout the match. But also very consistent and easily reached, because this is actually the real commander for the deck. So I've built decks around this with Gollus, where Gollus would fetch Valakut on the ETB effect of Gollus, and I've built it with Thrasios, as Thrasios can activate and put lands directly into play in instant speed, slamming mountains into play from a Thrasios activation and suddenly getting lightning bolts in instant speed during your opponent's turn when you want to interact with your opponent's creatures. But in this video we're gonna focus on how Soul of Windgrace utilizes the land. But first we need to go over a little bit of how we're going to combo off and win with this. Now sure, you can kill them manually one by one by putting mountains into play and getting Valakut triggers. By the way, Vesuva and Thespian Stage will help out a lot here, as Valakut is not legendary, you can have multiple copies of it. So eventually you can reach a stage where one mountain is 9 damage, 2 mountain that's 18 damage, that's half a player's life total. So 4 mountains, that's 36 life, basically killing a player. But reaching this stage is a little bit slow, we want something that is a little bit typical cEDH combo faster. And the answer to that is simply Ad Nauseam. With Ad Nauseam you get to put cards from your library into your hand and you lose life equal to that CMC cost. However, lands don't have a CMC mana cost, so you lose 0 life, and you can repeat this process how much as you want, so if your deck only contains lands, you will draw your entire deck. Now we're not gonna include a deck with only lands, because that would be very bad. We're going to include a deck with a lot of lands and a very low CMC value, so that we can draw a really high portion of the deck. We will then use a card called Mana Bond, only 1 green CMC, so only losing 1 life from the Ad Nauseam, so it's not really a problem for this combo. And when you have this in play and you go to your discard phase, you can discard your entire hand, that's bad, but you can put all of your lands from your hand into play. Remember, we have something like 70 cards in our hand, a huge portion of mountains, so we're gonna slam an enormous amount of Valakut triggers into play here. But how many mountains do we actually need? Well, each mountain is doing 3 damage, so 3 times 40 equals 120, which means you kill 3 opponents. But that is honestly a lot of mountains. Don't worry, there is an improvement. First we'll begin by casting someone for fast mana. By the way, they have a CMC 0 and CMC 1 on the carpet, so we're digging through them quite easily with the Ad Nauseam. You cast them for free and you get mana for free. Carpet of Flowers will usually help you out with a lot of mana as well. Now the only mana you need to reach post Nas is 2 green Exploration 1 mana bound 1. You need Exploration to put Valakut into play before you go to your end step with the mana bond effect. Because here's the thing, if you have Valakut and Vesuva entering play together, Vesuva can't enter as Valakut, because Vesuva can only enter with something that is already in play. So if you already have Valakut in play, Vesuva can enter as a Valakut, and you also get the Valakut triggers from Vesuva and all of the other mountains that come into play together with the Vesuva Valakut. So suddenly our math looks like this: 6 times 20 equals 120. However, if your opponent have less life, which they usually do, they usually hurt themselves, you need less mountains. Now I actually already have a deck tech video with Thrasios and Vial Smasher doing the exact same thing here. And if you want to take a look at this deck list, there will be a link for that in the description below of the video, together with a link to a deck tech video for this deck as well. But I think Soul of Windgrace is offering some more elements to this very interesting strategy. Life from the Loam have always been a very interesting card for land archetype decks. I really think it is an amazing card with this cat avatar. So there are 2 abilities on this creature that is absolutely amazing. When it comes to play or attacks, you may put a land card from a graveyard into play under your control tapped. Now you can actually steal your opponent's mountains in this case, which is helping you out achieving that mountain count a bit as well. But also, you can tap a red, a colorless, and discard a land card to draw a card. With Life from the Loam, you can withdraw, dredge, and return Life from the Loam back to your hand, then cast Life from the Loam and regain a whole bunch of lands into your hand. Suddenly we are moving a lot of lands into our graveyard, and that is making Splendid Reclamation really interesting, as it's 4 mana sorcery, return all lands from your grave into play, and well, if you have that Valakut, that Vesuv and those lands, you're getting the same effect, boom, and you kill all of your opponents. However, suddenly we have a tiny bit of a problem here. Splendid Reclamation and Ad Nauseam don't go hand in hand. Now you can actually play them, because you don't always need to dig that much. However, if you want to dig through the majority of your entire deck, then Splendid Reclamation is a little bit in the way. So therefore, this deck tech video contains 2 deck tech videos, and in the description below of this video I will leave a link to 2 different Soul of Windgrace Moxfield deck lists. One that is focused on the turbo fast 1-card combo Ad Nauseam, cast it in your main phase and you win the match. And the other that is not so low extreme CMC for the Ad Nauseam, but more into the put cards into your graveyard and reanimate all lands with Splendid Reclamation and also Word Sage. We get to that one later, which is actually the better one. However, we're gonna have Ad Nauseam inside the Splendid Reclamation version as well, because we're like still gonna draw an enormous amount of cards with just that one card. It's not gonna be a win con in that version, it's more gonna be a huge value engine and maybe sometimes a win con. So a big thing with Soul of Windgrace is that it's not actually card draw, it's card production, and you're gaining value as whenever he attacks you put a land from your grave into play. But you're filtering, you're discarding a card, you're losing a card to gain a card. You're not going plus hand size. But it does increase consistency, because you can use tutors like Gamble and Entomb to get your Valakut into your graveyard and then use the commander to get the land into play. We also have the green Realms Uncharted, the gifts ungiving for lands. Search out 4 lands with different names, 2 are going to your grave and 2 are going into your hand. And normally Valakut ends up in your graveyard because your opponents don't want you to have that. Now with this you can find Valakut, Vesuva and Thespian Stage, and well, one thing more, I don't care what that is. But with the commander you can bring them all into play, one by one. And this is where the Valakut strategy becomes actually quite strong, because it's very easy to find this. It's a 1-card combo for 0 mana cost, actually you need one more thing, you need 5 mountains, specifically mountain. But that's easy to achieve. Now some of you might say that we need something like a Prismatic Omen to make it work. You don't need Prismatic Omen. I've played with Prismatic Omen so much and so much without it that I realized you really don't need it. Prismatic Omen is a dead card inside the deck because it only does something if you have Valakut in play, and if you build your deck around having both Prismatic Omen and Valakut in play, it's easier to interact with, and it also demands more tutors, because it's no longer a 1-card land combo, it's a 2-card combo. But in the Splendid Reclamation version I am including Dryad of something, because it actually increases land drops as well. So this is a card that is good without the Valakut, but it also helps the Valakut. But we are gonna build the deck so that it functions with the Valakut as we intend without the Dryad. But now we're gonna connect everything together and making it into a beautiful synergy, which you probably already auto-included guessed. So with something like Crucible of Worlds or Ramanapa Excavator, like I said before, Soul of Windgrace doesn't have card on it, it's only card filtering. But with these 2 effects, and they are more effects similar to it, you're allowed to play lands from the graveyard, and now suddenly you are kinda more or less converting his ability into a card draw ability, or well, a value ability you could say. And extra land drops will make it more bonkers. However, extra land drops will only be good if you have the allowance to play lands from the graveyard, because once again, we're not really gonna have lands in our hand, we're gonna dump them very aggressively into the graveyard. So don't auto-include every extra land drop you could think of, because if you have too many, you run into the risk of having cards that could accidentally be dead cards in play if you don't have the effect where you're allowed to play lands from the grave. Similar with playing cards from the graveyard thing, if you have Crucible of Worlds in play, Random Excavator is a dead card. A very key thing when you're building a deck is to never be too all in on one thing. You need to be a little bit flexible and spread out. Let's talk a little bit more about the game plan with Splendid Reclamation, but more specifically World Shaper, because that's actually the one we are leaning a little bit more towards. So Life from the Loam is an awesome card, but there's a problem with it. If you dredge and mill down your Splendid Reclamation into your graveyard, you can't get it back. Well, you have some green spells, but you could accidentally mill those too. Now Blue, a color identity, just happens to have a card that can solve this problem, Mystical Sanctuary, which you could use to return Splendid Reclamation to top of your library, but we're not on the color identity of Blue, so can't do it. But we do have a black land that can return creatures from the graveyard straight to the top of your library, and then you can simply activate your commander and discard a land and draw that creature the same turn you put it there. And then you just need your World Shaper to die, you get the trigger, you put all the lands into play and you win the game. Now I know what some of you are gonna say, that this is getting clunky and a little bit strange, and you're not wrong. We need to play a lot of very strange lands that come into play tapped, and only tap for one color. We don't like that in cEDH at all. Now we're only 3 colors, so the color fixing isn't that hard. And we're in a color identity of green, so once again it's not that hard. But we need to get a lot of lands into play, we need to fill our graveyards with a lot of land. There's a lot of things to do to actually get there. But the deck do get there. It takes a little bit of time and some building, but it's very, very consistent. But once again, you're playing a really interactive game while you're getting there. With your commander, you're getting lands into play quite efficiently from the graveyard, so climbing out to that magical 6 and getting lightning bolts out of that, that's not hard. So everything looks amazing. We have card draw, we have interaction in the game plan, win con, we have a combo that can finish everything. I don't see a problem. Well, there's a huge one. I think you've heard about Thrasios Oracle and Demonic Consultation. Now, we do play a lot of interaction inside this deck with our main game plan, Valakut, as we can kill creatures. However, that does not really interact with this, unless you're killing the player, but this is winning faster than you're killing them with Valakut triggers. Valakut is very interactive versus creature decks, like you can be a very oppressive deck against people's commanders, but not against this. Therefore, we do need to include cards that are gonna interact with that and interact with a deck that is trying to do that, like Sphere of Resistance, or Thorn, Torpor Orb, Red Elemental Blast and Pyroblast. In my deck with Thrasios and Vial Smasher, the same strategy, I'm including blue counterspells that will deal with the job, but once again, we're not on blue, so we have to resort to Stax cards doing the job. In our interactive arsenal, we also have things like Tabernacle, a really expensive land, but it do a really good job versus mass creature decks. Grafdigger's Cage, Abrupt Decay, and Duress. I really like Hand Attack. It's proven to be quite effective sometimes. I do know that people's opinions around Hand Attack and Duress and things like this is not that popular. I like them, but because I know that a lot of people don't really like playing with them, I'm not gonna include them inside the deck list in the description below of the video. I will have other alternatives instead, but I would like to point out that I personally play these. I'm gonna have these inside the maybe board instead. Regardless, however, going into the game you need to have something that is going to be able to interact with this in some form of way to have some safety against people that are doing this. Now, of course, you could rely on other players to solve the problem for you, but sometimes they don't, so it's good that you have something as well, potentially. Another card I would really like to highlight inside this video is Tectonic Reformation. It acts like a secondary commander for the deck, actually it's a bit better, only 2 CMC instead of 4, and it's only 1 red mana to cycle the land. Now I had a game where someone had a Draenei Magistrate in play, and that's a problem because I felt like in that situation I need to get my commander into play to start digging with it and get through the deck. Now I had a demonic tutor, and I could, for example, find a kill spell and kill the Draenei Magistrate. I didn't. I found Tectonic Reformation, because in the end the best way to deal with a Stax piece is to simply play around it. Try to not be affected by it and simply don't kill it, because if I kill that, I enable my other two opponents from playing their commanders, and I don't want that. I'd rather have the Draenei Magistrate in play and figure out a way of solving the problem. It's also good versus Cursed Totem. Another thing I would like to mention here is that when it comes to your combo, your Splendid Reclamation and World Sage trick here, is that think of it as a cannon. You load your cannon with as much powder as you can, and the more powder you load it with, the more explosion you're gonna get and the more successful you're gonna kill your opponents. Now, sometimes you're gonna overkill them and do more damage than their life total, but you could actually fire off the cannon earlier, because you could rebuild the World Shaper here. You could get it into graveyard and get it back into play by looping that Mortar Mire and other cool tricks, and then you could fire off again. Because sometimes you're gonna notice that you don't have enough lands in your graveyard to kill all of your opponents, but you could board wipe and you could build an enormous land count here. And that's actually sometimes the right decision, because more lands, more good, more activation, more card draw, more digging, and eventually you get to fire off again, or maybe just putting them into play manually, you get there as well. It's very easy to see this with Thrasios as the commander. You have Valakut in play, you activate Thrasios, you put a mountain into play, and you bolt a creature, you're interacting, but you also gain a land. That land can then be used to activate Thrasios more. You see, it snowballs. You're starting small, and the more Thrasios activation that you do, the more Thrasios activations you're gonna do in the future. And every Thrasios activation more or less transforms into a lightning bolt. Soul of Windgrace functions the same, but it's a little bit harder to actually see. In any case, that's it for this video, and thank you so much for watching. I hope you liked it, and I'll see you next time, guys.